All right, so we are going to start another um, online session on our marine ecology lecture series. Um, the last time, if you remember, we were discussing about the coral reefs, in particularly the various adaptations that corals have. Right in there, we talk about the reproduction. Uh, as you know by now, the corals have almost all the available type of reproductions within them, from all the form of asexual to sexual reproduction, which um, making the corals one of the unique organisms as well. And then at the same time, they have a lot of other adaptations, right? There we also mentioned about the larval stages of corals. They are planktonic, as usually the most of the marine species, they have planktonic larval stages. Similarly, corals also have this planktonic larval stages. This larval ecology of reef organisms is going to be another um, huge subject, as well as there are a lot of things to talk about, but here I'm not going to talk a lot on this. But one thing you need to know is that the larvae, they, as a plankton, they are just floating on the waters, and they have to find a good place or suitable place, and then only they will settle, right? So that is something unique, because same as fish, a lot of fish, they have to find a place to settle, but coral organisms or the coral polyps or the larvae, actually they have to find a place or the suitable habitat. So until they find this suitable habitat, they have to just float on the water, maybe from weeks to sometimes months. So who provide the food for this transportation? Again, the symbiotic relationship with the zooxanthellae. We know that this symbiotic relationship from even the eggs, sometimes even from the larval stages, they have this symbiotic relationship where the algae produce the food for them, which is one of the adaptations that they have. Otherwise, the 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 larvae will run out of their food, and um, they easily avoid that from this symbiotic relationship. So this larval settlement, as I mentioned, so it might take long period of time. At the same time, this for settle for them to settle, they might need to travel several hundred meters to several hundred kilometers sometimes. So they have to go from one reef to another reef, or perhaps sometimes from one country to another country, reefs to settle. So settling in a habitat is going to be really difficult situation for the coral, right? So any of you going to work on the corals in the future? So this larval settlement going to be one of the very important area to study. And no one has worked in Sri Lanka on the larval ecology of crayfish, right? So, and I'm just refreshing the what we have discussed. At the same time, we discuss about the reefs in Sri Lanka in general, if you remember. So uh, I'll just go through some of the slides that we discussed previously. As you would see here, uh, in this screen, you will see that in Sri Lanka, we usually have this sandstone reef, the reefs built on the sandstone. Uh, and this kind of a rocky reefs, reefs that you can see on top of another uh, rock, usually a granite rock, right? Or otherwise usual coral reefs that you would see. So these are the different types of reefs that you will see, from sandstone, the rocky reefs, to the normal coral reefs that you would see, right? And then we also discuss that usually where do we have these corals, right? As you can see from this map of Sri Lanka. Uh, Reefs are everywhere actually. They are right around the country. Uh, so actually, this reef, this map is actually a older one, as I mentioned before. Doesn't include some of the reefs. Even here, there are along this northern coast, there are reefs. Right? Now, the situation of coral reefs, uh, I think we also discussed previously. What is the situation of coral reefs in Sri Lanka? Um, uh, I'll just refresh again if you forgot what you've done the last time we had a lecture. Uh, Personally, I have a lot of experience working in the coral reefs, pretty much right around the country. So I have witnessed the situation of the coral reefs. I think even you have some experience, especially those who have done the aquatic science, as well as even the others have go to coral reefs. So you might have seen the the good part of a reef. I mean, if you have been to Pigeon Island, I think most of you have been to Pigeon Island. The Pigeon Island is actually there are some live corals, but not all the corals like that. Right? I think I've shown these images before. These examples actually from the Hambantota uh, port, uh, where you can see some live corals. But other than that, this is one of the examples that I would like to share. Is Salitiv Island, or sometimes called Chalitiv Island, is associated with the Panichankerni. That's actually in the Wakarai, right? I hope you have heard about this term Wakarai. It's in the east coast, um, in between the Betikalo and Trincomalee. Uh, this you can see here is a reef lagoon and surrounding area also coral reefs. You can see the whole island is surrounded by this um, coral rubbles. Right? What you can see is the whole island, like here, just surrounded by these coral rubbles. Um, right, these are some of the satellite images to look at this. This rubbles has been there for quite long period of time. I think mostly likely after the tsunami in 2004. Thereafter, you can see this white color patch around the island, which may be an indication that this might have happened after the tsunami in 2004. I'm too sure, but that could be one of the reasons. And here you can see the classic examples or some of my own experiences with the coral reefs. That's how they look like. So these are somewhat live reef, but a little bit smaller too. But you see here the bleached corals, um, fully whitish color, right? So this one shows that it's now the bleaching, just started bleaching, and here you can see one live part, and the rest of the other coral is bleached. Right? And from these two, like here in the same this Salativa island, the reefs, the majority of the area, see the 100%, the coral cover is dead. Right? At least there is some coral, live coral here, but some areas like this, 100% dead. So if you use a like a quadrant to assess the live versus dead coral cover, so you can determine how much the live corals and how much the dead corals. So in this case, it's 100% dead corals. Right? So that is what you would see in most of the coral reefs in Sri Lanka, right? And other than that, this is, if you go a little further down from in the east coast, from Wakare towards the Betikilo, this is Pasikuda. Right? I hope you might have been to Pasikuda. Pasikuda also one of the well-known coral reefs, used to be, but again, this is the situation with the Pasikuda now. It's just now the people going just for swimming or wading. Right? There's no any coral reefs anymore, and then what you can see is like this. Hardly you see some live corals, but most of the corals covered with these the algae, macroalgae in particular, right, from Apadina here to Halimeda and Kolepa, and particularly this sargassum. Right? I think I might have a small video. I'm not too sure. I might have shown this before. You can see here. Right. So that indicates the situation with this Pasikuda reef. So used to be one of the good coral reefs in Sri Lanka, and this is the situation about 3 years back. Actually, I took this video. You can see that even if you want to snorkel in this area, so you have to like move the sargassum a little bit, even if you want to move. Right? So it's that much dense vegetation of sargassum, which virtually you are swimming or snorkeling in a sargassum forest. Right. So, right. So that's the situation, and at the same time, as you can see here, this again these images from the Selective Island. And even among these dead corals or dead areas, you can see that some newcomers, or we call the new recruits coming in. So you can see here, this one is one of the Acropora species that they have come back among these dead corals. Right? Even here, so that is one indication that that's one. This is why actually, even if it is a dead coral, right, it's worth protecting that dead reef, because there is a chance that they can regrow, right, with time. Even like 100% dead reef, they can sometimes recover. As you know, this coral might have gone through all these kind of events throughout the history, and then that is one of the hopes that we can think. I mean, we don't know that this is going to happen during our lifetime, but maybe another hundreds, 200, 500 times, there may be, who knows, some chance of recovering corals over the time. Right? But it's very unlikely with the present level of coral degradation. It's unlikely, but at least we have some hope where uh, the sometimes the coral can come back if the conditions are favorable, right? So this is an indication that what we call this coral settlement. If they find a habitat, I mean, if the corals were there before, So they will try again to settle in this environment, but all depend on the condition of that reef, right? So what I'm stressing here that even it is a totally deaf reef like in Unawatuna or even Hikkadwa, the protecting them for for the future is very important because they might come back, right? So keep in mind that idea that these reefs might come back, right? All right, that's basically the situation with the coral reefs in Sri Lanka. I mean, I have a lot of information about the coral reefs, and right, that's previously that's why the aquatic science students had a separate course on coral reefs and their management, but eventually we have to get rid of. So um, there are many reasons why we should study coral reefs, as I have mentioned several times, because corals are one of the unique um, type of ecosystem I learn, especially if you're talking about the animal adaptation, right? So this coral reef is going to be uh, best thing that you would think of uh, to talk about the animal's adaptation to the environment, right? All right. Anyone has any questions so far? Yes. No questions. Um, so if you don't have any questions, so let's move into the today's topic. Um, this is going to be a most important topic when come to the coral reefs. And what are the major impacts to the coral reefs, and what are the solutions that we can think of? Uh, since you might have been to a coral reefs, you might have some idea about the type of impacts that coral have, and as well as um, you can think of what are the solutions. So we will discuss a little detail on what are the real impacts, and what are the solutions that we can think of. To start with, I have a small video. Uh, let's watch that video.
Coral reefs are filled with colorful ocean life, but they're in danger of dying off. The planet has already lost 50% of its coral in the last 30 years. If the rest go, consequences would be dire. Sea life has the most to lose. Coral reefs cover less than 1% of the ocean floor, but they provide an essential ecosystem for a quarter of all marine life. One of these creatures, the type of sea slug, is actually an important ingredient in certain cancer-fighting compounds. In fact, some estimates predict we are 300 to 400 times more likely to find new drugs from coral reef ecosystems than land-based ones. But that's only if they survive the next century. In addition to breakthrough medicines, over 500 million people depend on these reefs for food and work. Almost a fifth of the world's protein comes from seafood, with people eating on average almost 50 pounds per year. The U.S. fishing industry supports 1.5 million jobs alone, nearly a quarter of what the U.S. meat and poultry industry employs. Without reefs, billions of sea life creatures would suffer. Millions of people would lose their most significant food source, and economies would take a major hit. But it's not just about the jobs. Coral reefs attract tourists to more than 100 countries and territories worldwide. These tourists spend billions of dollars diving into the underwater landscapes. Without these attractions, economists estimate that coastal tourism would drop by more than 9%, which is equivalent to about $36 billion. These reefs also provide protection to the tourist reliant coastlines. They act as natural barriers, canceling out 97% of a wave's strength and protecting more than 200 million people. Building seawalls for the same protection costs $2.5 million per mile. But today, humans are putting these all at risk. Rising ocean temperatures and pollution stress the coral, which can kill entire coral ecosystems within just a few months. Half of the US Caribbean coral died in one massive bleaching event back in 2005. If we do nothing to cool the oceans, the planet's remaining coral could all be wiped out.
Right. I think that video gave you a very good insight on the the importance as well as the what will happen if we lose these coral reefs. So, with that, we look at what are the major issues with the coral reefs, and then we can discuss a bit more on the and how we can get rid of. So the first and major issues with the coral reefs is actually this overfishing. The No matter where we in the world, we are using um, so many different types of fishing gear, as well as most of this fishing gear very destructive for the coral reefs, especially the uh, um, bottom nets as well as trolling. And likewise, it's not only the fishing gear that affect the coral reefs, but also at the same time that we are removing the bigger fish. Right? The bigger fish means, right, if they are bigger, which means they can produce more eggs. Right? If the fish are smaller, they will produce less eggs. Right? So it's not only the the, the habitat destruction, but also we removing the bigger fish, which reducing the the fish. Right? At the same time, we are removing the top predators from coral reefs. What happened then? That will increase the herbivorous fish. The herbivorous fish, actually, some of the herbivorous fish, they are actually coral eaters. Like they eat only coral polyps. Right? So if there is more herbivorous fish, which means that will degrade more coral reef, right? Likewise, this is like a chain-like reaction. Um, Even though we call it as of overfishing, but in that affects in different ways. At the same time, other destructive type fishing gear, something like a dynamite fishing. Um, that's again, um, even in Sri Lanka, some people still use this dynamite fishing. This is so unfortunate. To get a couple of kilograms of fish, we use this dynamite and then we destroy a coral reef forever. Just few seconds, and then that coral might have survived for thousands of millions of years, and then you just destroy in a few seconds, right? That's something unfortunate, right? So, so overfishing. But one thing I forgot to mention about the impact on the coral reef, we can actually divide it into two, like a natural causes and the anthropogenic causes. So unfortunately, there are a lot of natural causes of coral decline as well. Right. The second thing is the human impact. Now, the thing is, it's very hard to disintegrate this, how much the human cause and how much the natural cause, because there are a lot of natural causes, of course, and there are a lot of anthropogenic causes. So now these are affecting some simultaneously, and then that's why it's so difficult to separate which one cause which one, and then that's why we have to think of both the natural and as well as anthropogenic, the human mediated impact on the coral. Right? And in the previous slides, I have listed some of the the major threats. The natural threats include the hurricanes like the cyclones and El Nino or La Nino, different concepts that we are talking about, and the other competitors has that compete with the corals, something like algae, as well as the coral eaters, like there are some mollusks as well as some sea stars, crown of stone starfish. They all eat corals, so all these causing natural degradation of corals. Right? And at the same time, diseases. Right? There are some diseases in coral reefs also destroying corals. And the other one is ocean acidification. And now the ocean acidification is not really natural, only actually there's a human dimension as well. But anyway, uh, it's not directly human cause. That's why it's caused as the natural. From the human point, this overfishing, the coastal development, and the pollution, right? uh, and the global temperatures, increasing of global temperatures, and careless tourism. These are some of the reasons for coral degradation. We can discuss a little bit further on this subject, right? Uh, so we already talked about the overfishing, and the other one is the land-based pollution, which at the end ended up in the ocean. Most of the pollutants that you put it in the land base or the land sources, they are ended up in the freshwater system, and eventually through the rivers, they will ended up in the ocean, causing much of the harm from this land-based sources into the ocean. Right? Starting from plastic or whatever you put it in the land, but they ended up in the ocean at the end. Right? So, uh, so the land-based sources is another issue. You can see I just added this a small screenshot from my mobile phone. Just only this morning I got this message from BBC News. Right. So Great Barrier Reef has lost half of its coral since 1995. So actually, it's been posted yesterday, but I got it today as a news item. Um, as a screenshot, actually. So, so this problem of coral reefs actually not only limited to Sri Lanka. As you can see, the Great Barrier Reef is one of the most respected coral reefs and one of the largest reefs in the world, and one of the well-managed reefs in the world as well. So, needless to talk about the Sri Lankan sea coral reefs, because we are virtually doing nothing to protect coral reefs. Right? We don't do anything actually to protect coral reefs, other than establishing a marine protected areas in some of the reefs, but it doesn't really make big difference when compared to the Great Barrier Reef. You spend some time in the internet and see what they are doing in the Great Barrier Reef. I might have some videos I will show you. Um, they are making a lot of effort. It's not like now, but they have been doing a lot of things for last several decades. Uh, but even with that, these reefs are dying. So needless to talk about the Sri Lankan situation, right? And the other issue with the coral reefs are the climate change, right? It's climate change, as you know, it's a complex phenomenon. There are many things associated with climate change, as you see from the warming ocean, that the increase in temperatures, right? And the increase in temperatures definitely cause the harm directly to the corals, because it's the coral polyp and the zooxanthellae symbiotic relationship depend on the temperature as well. Any increase in the temperature, and that will cause what we call the thermal stress in coral, right? We call it as the thermal stress in the coral, particularly the zooxanthellae. And with the thermal stress, the, the zooxanthellae, they move out of the coral. So it's not clear, very clear whether the coral polyps push them out, or whether these zooxanthellae go out by themselves. It's not very clear. But what is clear is they go out of the symbiotic relationship. That symbiotic relationship breaks, and that's where what you call the coral bleaching happens. Right? And in these high temperatures, what is the scientists call as the cooking the corals, and over the time they destroying the coral. And the other thing is with the climate change, the sea level rise that we expect. When the sea level go up, then it will impact on the depth of the reef will increase then, which means that there's less light penetration to the deeper areas. And with increase in sea level rise, it's expected to have more um, currents or the more waves, which will stir up or we call a lot of sedimentation. Right? And with the climate change, you're expecting to have more storm conditions or more cyclones, because with all these global changes, right? And changes in precipitation, that's the rainfall. That the more rainfall means more fresh water to the oceans, and and at the same time, more rainfall means bringing so much sediment into the sea. And on the other hand, the alteration in the ocean currents also expected with the all the cyclones and everything, and ocean acidification. Likewise, you see there are it's the climate change is going to be a very complex phenomenon, and these are interlinked. They affect one another as well, and so which means if the climate change really happens, that we are expecting the coral to be degraded much faster than we predict, because they are integrated. There's multitude of impact from this. So as you would see, it's going to be a very complex thing. Um, we might not even be able to understand the real impact of the, the climate change in the field. Um, and here you see the, the bleached corals, uh, which I have showed this image, or I've already shown you. And then here another example. This also from one of my photographs. I think that also from East Coast. You see, it's very good live coral reef here, but you see the coral bleaching started here. But this reef unaffected, this coral unaffected, but this uh, uh, very much affected. Now, this is one of the things that we have observed, that the branching corals like this, they are the fastest growing corals. At the same time, personally, I have observed that the branching corals are the corals that's mostly affected by the coral bleaching than the other corals. So of course the other corals also affected, but the faster growing reefs are also fast affecting the bleaching as well, unfortunately, right? um, so this also actually I found from one of the websites. There's a nice title, "The Most Beautiful Death," right? Yes, very good title for even for a movie. So let's talk about this the death of the beautiful coral ecosystem, right? Um, with that, I have another video.
We've now had 3 major bleaching events on the Great Barrier Reef. In 98, 2002, and again just recently in 2016. We zigzagged along the whole length in a helicopter and fixed-wing plane. We put about 100 people underwater. The extent and severity of this bleaching is off the chart. Typically, a bleached coral is nutritionally compromised. But this time around, we discovered an additional phenomenon. Many of the corals we surveyed were already dead. They actually cooked. And that's because the temperatures this time around were so extreme.
Already in 2016, severe coral bleaching has also been recorded across the Pacific Ocean, in Fiji, across the Indian Ocean, in the Maldives and the Seychelles, and even in the southern Red Sea. Similar events are predicted across the Caribbean and Micronesia. In a year in which the impacts of heat stress on the global ocean have reached unprecedented extremes, as the distribution of marine species continues to change, as storm surges continue to intensify, as sea ice and glacier melt accelerate, and as sea level rise and human displacement intensifies.
Countries around the world in Paris last year have committed to a rapid transition away from fossil fuels towards more sustainable, renewable energy.
Paris marked the moment when the world finally decided to heed the ever-rising mountain of evidence that had been piling up for years and began instead to galvanize our focus.
S'il y avait une seule chose à réussir pour appliquer l'accord de Paris, c'est la réduction des émissions de gaz à effet de serre. Pour augmenter la résilience de l'océan, il faudrait bien sûr lutter contre le réchauffement climatique, donc monter en puissance sur les énergies renouvelables, y compris les énergies renouvelables marines.
Right. So you can understand the scale of the damage to the corals, right, around the world, right? So the scientist who was talking, Terry Hugh, is from the same university where I studied for my PhD. So uh, James Cook University, actually the one of the top universities in the world working on the coral reefs, because they are right in the Great Barrier Reef. Right. So in summary, if you look at the human impact on the coral reefs, we can categorize in like this. We have the natural processes, of course, but other than that, the human impact, from sedimentation to overfishing. Rather, it's not only the overfishing, but rather it's overexploitation. It's not only the fishing, but I'll come to that one later. And the careless recreation, the pollution to climate change. So we will discuss this thing. We can look at each and every incident a little bit. So the natural causes, as you know by now, the particularly the hurricanes or these tropical storms are mostly affecting the corals. As you can see here, this example, uh, this is before a hurricane, and this is after. You can see um, uh, um, right, the before and after. Now, this is a natural cause, another natural cause, what we call the coral diseases, right? Uh, um, right, coral diseases, and from that to the others as the competitors as well as the um, the coral eaters. Right? Here the example that's come from the some of the mollusks. This you can see the everywhere this the snails or the mollusk covering the coral reefs and destroying them. Another thing is this crown of thorns starfish. Uh, another big issue for the coral reefs. You might have heard about it even in the Pigeon Island. Uh, uh, the sometime back, a few years back, there was a lot of this kind of a crown of thorns starfishes um, that was eating the corals there, and the divers had to manually remove this crown of stars. Thousands of crown of thorns starfish. Some the so the you have to sometimes intervene in this kind, right? And another another big issue with the that affecting the corals is actually the sedimentation, right? Other than the temperature, or what we always call as the increase in temperature, sedimentation is one of the major culprit for coral reef damages. Um, right, because the corals smothering the, the sorry the sediments, they are smothering coral reefs or the covering the corals, and then that uh, lead to coral death because the light that stops the light penetration, and that destroy the what we call the zooxanthellae, and they won't have a chance to photosynthesis, and they eventually die. Also, this sedimentation, right? I think in personally in Sri Lankan situation, more than the temperature, I think this sedimentation is one of the major causes of coral decline. Um, uh, Largely, the the marine environment is flooded with a lot of sediments, and they are covered with the the sediment, and then with what we call as the smothering in coral reefs, and eventually the dying them. Right. Right. There are many sources of sediment into the marine environment, uh, and they are destroying the corals. Right. And another way of getting sedimentation is, and this example, uh, in the marine environment. Right? So this example come from the um, one of the construction around Colombo, right? I don't want to say the name, but you can see how much sediments they are bringing in. Of course, they have some sediment barriers here, stop further spreading, but of course, there are a lot of contaminants anyway. And similarly, the many this kind of a coastal construction from harbors to other agricultural and dredging events, all these causing a lot of sedimentation in the marine environment. And which eventually badly impact on the corals. So this is evident in the corals, where the most corals now is covered with this kind of a sediments, and eventually they are dying, right? And that's what we call as smothering. Smothering coral reefs uh, due to the, the sedimentation. All right. And from that to this, the fishing issues, the big fishing issues, which I don't want to mention, which you already know about. That's you know very much about the overfishing, and then as I mentioned before, this fishing not affect the corals in different ways. The if they are catching too young, they won't have enough fish to reproduce, right? Um, and that affect the whole food web within the coral reefs. And this particularly important for the herbivorous fish, right? There are two different ways, like if they are like a coral eating fish, if they increase, that's going to cause another issue. But on the other hand, there are some algae eating or the herbivorous fish where they eat the algae, the macroalgae, where they compete with the corals, right? So in that way, so that affect different way. So you can see the impact, right? And with the fishing, the other major issue is the overexploitation, as I mentioned before. You can see even in Sri Lanka now, there are many places the people selling this the branches of corals or as ornaments. Um, but luckily, not many this kind of ornaments in Sri Lanka. But now in some like where there are some expensive shops where they're selling this. But some other countries, like I have seen in Taiwan, Korea, Japan, it's very common thing that there are thousands of this kind of uh, the shops, they call as the curio shops. They're selling this kind of ornaments made of corals. I know there are a lot of beliefs in people that when corals bring some, luck for the people, especially these black corals, uh, and some believe that they have some medicinal value, and because of that, you have this kind of ornaments, whole bit of corals. They can be very expensive actually. You can't even imagine, or you can't even believe. They were sometimes expensive than a gold, right? So that's a different um, industry, and even they're using it as a museum, right? So from that to the other um, issue of corals is the, the careless recreation. As you can see here, the boating and diving, snorkeling and fishing, surfing, uh, all these causing damages to the coral reef. You might have seen in the Pigeon Island. It's every day that how many boats going into the Pigeon Island, and every time if they are going very fast, that really damages the coral. Some physically damaged, sometimes the oil discharge, the whole affecting. The diving, of course, if you are a very good computer diver, you won't harm the corals, but if you are not, and that's mainly the snorkeling. Uh, I think some of you have definitely snorkeling in the Pigeon Island, right? I don't know how many of you have destroyed some at least small pieces of corals, because if you are not competent for snorkeling, and you will destroy the coral. Right? So that's going to be a big issue again. Right. Right. So, and this kind of things very common in the coral reef. Like we call that trampling or just standing on the corals. It's common scenery in any coral reef that we see the people just standing on a coral reef like this. Uh, I don't know how many of you did this while you are snorkeling, right? And putting anchors in the corals, I will show you later, and fishing in the corals, sport fishing or right, all these causing issue. And here, you see the anchor, the boat anchors in the corals, how they have put these anchors, right? They are affecting the corals. Like in the well-managed coral reef areas, you can see this kind of it's called the mooring. Right? They have special areas where you can tie the boat, right? Not to put the anchors into the corals, or otherwise this kind of a artificially made bottom where you can use your anchor here, right? So unfortunately, nowhere in the coral reef in Sri Lanka, right? We could have this kind of thing even in the Pigeon Island, but we don't have, unfortunately, right? Right. And pollution, of course, we spoke about that, from this oil pollution to debris, all things are affecting. And on top of that, the power plants, they are putting a lot of warm water into the marine environment, right? And then they have long-term effect. Fortunately, in Sri Lanka, we don't have really the many power plants, but there is no actually the coral reefs around power plant. But in the Bar Reef, there is one power plant, that's the Norachole, but it's far away, more than 20, 30 kilometers. We can't think of any effect from this power plant in the coral reef, but we don't know how it's going to affect long term, right? So it's heavy raining outside. I don't know whether if you have any disturbances, so please bear with me, right? And from that to the climate change, right? I don't want to go into that. You know very much about the climate change. How does it affect? And again, the bleaching. Um, right. Right. This is an example for coral bleaching. Uh, and this, the global map showing the bigger picture, like how much the human impact on the coral reefs. It's not actually the coral reefs, but in general, how much the human influence of the ocean, a scale from blue to red. The red or the brown or darker the color is, the more impact. You can see the darker areas, even around Sri Lanka, you can see this more severe impact, high impact, right? But the blue color means very low. This very small area in the globe that has limited impact. That's the Arctic Ocean, and that's only the polar region that's less effect from the human being, which means the every inch, every corner of the ocean is now affected from the human being, and that affect the ocean, and any influence on the ocean again affecting the coral reefs, and that causing a lot of issues in the coral reefs, right? And so what are the major issues affecting the coral reefs? This graph shows some indication. So overexploitation is contribution more nearly 40%, more than 30.